Welcome to another episode of Safer Communities Canada podcast, where we have brave, authentic conversations with leaders and people with lived experiences. We are very excited today to have our special guest, Sara Tessier, in the house, and me being one of your co-hosts, Arvana Zadarad, Executive Director here at YAAACE, and my co-host today,
Tanisha Evans, Program Lead for the New Narrative Initiative here at YAAACE.
So we always start out with a short bio of our guests, and then we will delve into the conversations. So Sara Tessier is dedicated social justice advocate with nearly decades of experiences championing the rights of marginalized, victimized, criminalized, and institutionalized individuals across Canada. With a foundation in lived experiences, Sara has worked tirelessly with numerous organizations such as John Howard Society, Elizabeth Fry Mainland Nova Scotia, and Coverdale Justice Society and YAAACE, providing crucial support to those transitioning out of provincial jails, particularly during the challenging times of the COVID pandemic, which we know was rough for everybody. In her roles now as an outreach worker for the GATE program, a peer mentor with Coverdale, that's not her role now, sorry, I'll take that back. I'll just restate that and we cut that. In her role as an outreach worker for the GATE program, a peer mentor with Coverdale, and a peer support training facilitator with a 7-Step Society, Sara demonstrated her commitment to empowering individuals by offering guidance, mentorship, and practical assistance. Now, in her current role as the Impact Director for Formerly Incarcerated Persons at the Northpine Foundation, Sara's focus is on facilitating successful reintegration of individuals exiting the Canadian prison system. This is where we met, and our work really aligns well with here at YAAACE. Her work encompasses a wide range of initiatives, including providing access to legal services, affordable housing, post-secondary education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. And through these strategic partnerships that she curates all across Canada, financial support, expert guidance, and all the other various forms of support, she collaborates and brings together the stakeholders to design unique ventures that are innovative and foster meaningful relationships and contribute to a healthier and a more inclusive Canada, which in the long term not only solves problems, but also leads to a lot of savings in taxpayers' dollars. Beyond her professional endeavors, Sara really is influential through her many advisory roles and board memberships in numerous organizations. We're going to learn a little bit about that as we tap into the questions. And she's a prolific writer and speaker on various topics, including prison issues, carceral law, advocacy, human rights, sexual violence, reproductive justice, LGBTQ issues, and mental health. And through her multifaceted efforts, she continues to make significant contributions to advancing social justice and empowering marginalized communities across Canada. And I know this bio doesn't do her justice, so thank you for being here, and we hope to bring out the rest through our conversations.
Thank you very much for inviting me today.
So my first question to you would be, can you share your journey on what inspired you to become a social justice advocate?
Absolutely. So I never in my wildest dreams ever thought I would be in this position. And that's because since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, my goal in life was to be a police officer, because I used to watch Chips, and Eric Estrada was my all-time hero. Mm-hmm. Yes, I just dated myself. I'll be 50 on Friday.
If you don't know, Google it, YouTube it.
So Poncherello was my hero, and it really was because I wanted to be able to arrest my father, because, he was abusing me and selling me in the sex trade and things since I was very young until I was a teenager. And so a lot of maladaptive behaviors came about, especially, I truly believe that society failed me in so many ways, because when I was 8 and I tried to say something, he shot himself. And the courts gave me back to him 2 years later. He didn't pass away. And so that just goes to show that, no matter how many times a child reaches out, they're often not believed, or, it's just brushed under the rug because the system's not designed to be able to help people. I was bounced around from different foster homes because they just had no place to put me. They eventually ended up shipping me off to Minneapolis for 6 months. to a youth treatment center because they had no foster homes for me. So yeah, so those maladaptive behaviors that were instilled and that I learned through my survival led me to my offense path, where I committed some armed robberies just to be cool because some guys told me that they did it and got away with it, and I wanted to do better than them. So I spent 5 years inside prison on an 8-year sentence. And during that time, I really deep dived into why I had these maladaptive behaviors and what can I do to learn the proper skills and tools that I needed to change. I wasn't able to sustain the kind of livelihood I wanted. I had great friends that were professionals and lawyers and doctors, and I was traveling all over the world and stuff, but I never felt I deserved it or fit in. And so that, I really needed to find out what I needed to do to change. So I took dialectical behavior therapy, and it was great.
What is that for our readers who don't know what that is?
So dialectical behavior therapy is composed of 4 components, which is mindfulness. So you learn mindfulness skills, distress tolerance. So you learn skills to deal with distress, emotion regulation. Mine was non-existent. I'd go 0 to 100.3. Everything, the slightest little change would set me off, and I'd get angry and violent because I didn't know how to handle anything. And then the last one is interpersonal effectiveness, which teaches you how to interact with others. And that's when they kicked me out, was like when I got to that module, because I was articulate. They thought I was just trying to learn ways to manipulate people further instead of the change that I was really looking for. So I started working inside the prison as a peer legal advocate for CAFES. I was trained, and it really showed me the injustices that were going on and that people really didn't have the capacity to be a voice for themselves and advocate for themselves. And that's why so many injustices and inhumane practices were happening. And so I did that, and I studied for my LSAT. I was released January 9th, 2020, wrote my LSAT. And then I was working in community with different organizations, John Howard, Elizabeth Fry, Coverdale Justice Society. And then I saw this posting for Northpine, and I sent it off to my dear friend, Senator Kim Pate, and I said, do you think I'd be good at this? Because I still wasn't confident in myself. I didn't think I was worth anything or had any value to add. And she said, I'm writing you a letter of recommendation right now, which was 2 pages long, and it put me in tears. So I got the job with Northpine, and I was able to be on this completely different platform where I'm able to go across Canada and help in more systemic way, where we can work together with organizations to help people reintegrate successfully back into society. And so that's what I do now.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much for being vulnerable right off the bat with our first question and modeling, vulnerability as a form of strength. I think the stories are so powerful and people are able to connect with that. And I had a follow-up question to that because, I think we talk quite a bit around incarceration, or even here at YAAACE supporting folks who are formerly incarcerated. Can you talk us, you talked about validation, like, can you take us through the psyche of, how was it when you first started, or, your first year of being incarcerated compared to now going through that therapy and, trying to kind of figure out who you are, what the future looks like. Like, walk us through someone who has no idea what incarceration might be, particularly, not as a male.
Yeah. So, I mean, the very first thing that happens, and I think this is very important for people to recognize and acknowledge, is that the very first thing that happens when you walk through those doors of a prison is you're strip searched. And when you're looking at somebody like me with a traumatic past with sexual abuse and violence, it's self-reported that 83% of women incarcerated have been sexually abused or assaulted at some point in their lives. And
can you repeat that stat? Because that's a very high number.
83%. And that's only self-reported, which means we believe the numbers to be higher than that. And it's not much different for men as well. You know, a lot of men come for, and it's even more stigmatized, and it's even more, not as open and talked about when it comes to men, which is, really sad.
It's a bit of a taboo topic, right?
Exactly. So when you're taking somebody and you're immediately traumatizing them again, and let's admit it, sexual assault is non-consensual sexual contact, sexual, comments, So you tell me, do you think that being strip searched is consensual? So let's call it what it is. It's a form of sexual assault, and we need to put a stop to that, especially considering statistics show and research shows that it doesn't even reduce the amount of contraband that comes into the prison. Nope. So that's just upon entrance,
That was just part one.
That was just part one. That was just the first 10 minutes of your stay. So you're thrown into an environment where, you're with very vulnerable people. And, so there's a lot of different mental health issues. There's substance abuse issues. There's people who've been, traumatized, people with PTSD, people who are triggered easily, people with zero emotion regulation like myself, or the ability to handle any form of distress. So you're in an environment that's concentrated with these vulnerable people and marginalized people that, of course, it's going to be exacerbated. And then, of course, if you're having issues, you're scared to say, I'm feeling vulnerable, or I feel, like harming myself. I don't feel like I should exist, which is very common. Because then they throw you into a segregation unit with nothing on except a paper gown. You have to eat finger food. You can't even have their rubber sporks. And you're watched 24 hours a day on camera. And, it wasn't too long ago, just a couple years ago, where it was leaked where a guard who had an individual who was vulnerable on suicide watch in a cell in a correctional provincial facility in Nova Scotia. He leaked the video onto his Snapchat or something, and his friend saw it and reported it because they were making fun of this vulnerable person who was crying out for help and calling her, all kinds of derogatory names and stuff. And so that's the kind of treatment that people don't see that happens inside the prisons. And even furthermore to that is, we're looking at a system that has full power and control over vulnerable individuals. And not everybody is in there for the right reasons. And a prime example of that is the guard, Brian Wilson, who was sexually assaulting many, many women, including myself, until I was able to put a stop to that, And so these are the things that happen that society doesn't see.
Yeah.
And I think society's mentality needs to take a huge shift because it's instilled to them, various, political platforms and things like that they need to be afraid unless there's more prisons and if people, aren't in the community. And the reality is, the vast majority of people in prison are going to be released. They will be in your community. They already are. Do we want them released with no support so they're forced to, remain in this cycle of crime and reoffend in order to survive? Or do we want to have those supports in the community and resources for them to thrive and become productive members of society? These are your neighbors, whether you like it or not. So why wouldn't you be reaching out to help them? Right. And that stems from my belief in a core value of kindness that I choose to live by every day. And the biggest example of that I can give is when Brian Wilson went for sentencing for sexually assaulting me in the prison, I wrote my victim impact statement and read it. And I said, these are all the ways you harmed me, but now my heart hurts for you. because you're going to an environment where I know you're not going to get the help you need because I've been there.
Right.
And I want you to know I forgive you. And I hope you can learn to forgive yourself so that you could start the healing journey and so that you can stop harming others and be the best you can be. And just know I support you in that journey.
Wow.
So I think that was really important because then I later found out that he was really working hard towards that and, making those changes because he was overwhelmed with the fact that I showed so much kindness after all the harm he caused me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Probably wasn't expecting that at all.
Great. Thank you for that. I'll pass it on to Tanisha for our next question, or if you want to share anything.
Yeah, I just want to thank you actually for being so vulnerable with like your journey, because I myself too was formerly incarcerated. So I just like being able to like share the process, and I can tell like just with you telling the story, like you're using it as a strength to kind of portray what happened. Because the strip search thing, it's definitely something that can be embarrassing, especially when guards are not very kind when it comes to the process. So I just want to thank you for sharing that part. There's also the part around being Black and coming to jail. I remember like I had single braids in at the time, and I literally just did my hair, and they literally wanted me to pull out all like 120 of my braids in front of a guard, and they made sure I threw like everything in the garbage, and they had like a dog sniffing me like while I was doing it. So just like things around that where like society doesn't really catch on to those things, especially what if I was afraid of dogs? What if I was allergic to dogs, right? So that can be very traumatic for women, like just entry wise, like not even like going out into general pop.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. If I kind of like same with you, I feel like I kind of use it as my strength now, like kind of going like towards the work that I do, because we work with children and youth that are going through a process that they don't know. So I feel like it's kind of best that they work with somebody who's kind of been through it and can kind of guide them properly and then provide those supports that they need to reintegrate properly, whether it's preparing them to go in or preparing them like when they're getting out. So, yeah.
And I think that the healing piece is so important because I think you're both speaking from a entry point of having processed it and kind of either, you're along your healing journey. Healing never really finishes, but I think you're well past where you started out, where, many people we encounter in trying to help them, we see that they even haven't started that journey. They don't have the language. They don't have the thought process to really dissect it. You got to the stage of forgiveness. Many people are still in the vengeance zone. And so I think, we had Greg previously where we really broke this down, the impact of trauma on the psyche. And I think it's so important, which I think transitions to the other point we're going to discuss is, society is under this assumption that jail and the fear and the culture, you're supposed to go in, say, okay, I learned and come out and never do it again in the ideal world. But we know that's not what happens. You actually come out worse than when you went in, regardless of what you did. To your point of, you knew the type of help that person needed, they weren't going to get it. Likely they were going to get worse. And if anything, end up staying and rotting and so forth. And so I think one of the question is really, what initiatives have you found most effective in facilitating successful reintegration and that reduces recidivism, that addresses the root causes, which we know is in the healthcare and the housing and employment?
Well, it's really hard through the initiatives that I currently fund across Canada. It's really hard to really pick and choose which ones are the best because they all have different purposes. And really and truly, it's about meeting people where they're at. So, there's investments where they're taking the most vulnerable people that nobody else wants to take in from jail and providing them with, harm reduction environment. It's a housing first approach with a harm reduction environment. And they're provided with an occupational therapist and nurse practitioner and a doctor And
So sorry to jump in. What is harm reduction? It's another word we hear a lot, but from your stance, what does harm reduction look like when you look into a program, for example?
Right. So harm reduction, contrary to popular belief, isn't that people are condoning the use of substances or that they're encouraging it. It's about the fact that we know that people are going to use. And so we just want to make sure that they do it safely and that we can prevent deaths from happening. And that's what it boils down to. And our studies have shown, and it's very common knowledge now, that harm reduction is actually more effective when working with trauma than abstinence. Because if you take somebody's means of coping with things, they're numbing the pain, they're masking the pain through substances. If you take that away, they're not going to be able to effectively deal with those root causes of the trauma because they're constantly going to be wanting to hide that pain and mask it up. And so the more they're able to, lean on those coping mechanisms while working through the trauma, the less they end up needing those coping mechanisms and the less they rely on the substances and eventually move towards the abstinence. So it's not about, encouraging the drug use. It's about recognizing that right now where this person's at, taking that away isn't going to help them be successful.
Great. Thank you for that. And sorry, I jumped in. You were just talking about some of the programs that you founded and how they meet people where they're at using that harm reduction lens.
Right. So my very first investment was with Coverdale Justice Society, and that really stemmed from a lot of things. Ashley Avery, who's the executive director there, is a very, very forward-thinking, innovative, level 5 transformative leader that recognizes that, the way things are currently being done is not working. And a big part of that is when you look at the homelessness jail cycle, and that came from the, seeing during the pandemic, having to build the pop-up shelters with the full wraparound services to decarcerate the jails in Nova Scotia. And Ashley and I wrote an article that's on my LinkedIn page. It was the largest mass decarceration in Nova Scotia history. Wow. And it talks about the successes of that and everything. And then Department of Justice says, well, we're going to put our money into electronic monitoring instead. Well, 100% of these people were homeless, so they had no address to be released to. So where are you going to monitor them from? Right? So what had happened was the jails started filling back up. So we ended up investing in Coverdale Justice Society, and they opened up a 15-bed home called Caitlin's Place. And it was actually named after a client of Coverdale's called Caitlin Greenwell. And she had a dream of a place like this where she could go, a safe space, where she could get the support she needs and not have to return back to jail. And unfortunately, during the pandemic in September 2020, she committed suicide. And so this is named after her. And it's a 15-bed house for women and gender diverse individuals who are sitting on remand in provincial jail because they're homeless. And, if you look at the statistics, over 70% of people in provincial jails are on remand. That means that they haven't been convicted of a crime. So these aren't even people that are sentenced for committing a crime. These are people that were just accused of a crime. And quite often what happens is you're seeing people taking deals, and pleading guilty to things that they haven't done or that they wouldn't be convicted of just so that they're not sitting in that environment, because it's not a good environment to be. If you're on remand, you don't have the same access to the programs that are
You're
provided.
going to higher security.
Right?
Facility.
You go to higher security. And so this allows women and gender diverse individuals on remand to be able to go out to Caitlin's Place. And it's staffed 24 hours a day. They have full wraparound services. And like I said, occupational therapist, nurse practitioner, doctor, programming, employment opportunities, education, And so Department of Justice did not want to fund this because of the harm reduction practice. So Ashley was very innovative, and Department of Community Services saw this as a way to address their housing crisis. And after 7 months of our investment, they stepped up and said, we're going to give permanent core operational funding to this. Mm-hmm. And since then, we opened Honor House, which is a 15-bed space for youth as well, which Department of Community Services also came in and said we will permanently fund if Northpine steps in and does the first 2 years. Okay, and now we just recently did our third one, which will be a Coverdale Justice Institute that would also have 15 beds, and it would amalgamate all their programming and services under one roof, and a national coordinator that would scale the model to other areas of Canada as well. And Department of Community Services again said if Northpine sustains the first 2 years, we will take over permanent core operational funding.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it didn't happen alone. I mean, I invested in other organizations that would help. So Mobile Outreach Street Health is a part of that we funded, that provides the occupational therapists and stuff like that. And so it actually transformed an entire community because people are so used to working in silos, and organizations are so used to the traditional funding models that keep them fighting over scraps, over crumbs and working in silos. So this broke down those silos and actually enabled people to, share their resources and work together and collaborate for the best outcomes and the most impact for the individuals that they're serving.
Okay.
Awesome.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really love that you think outside the box and you're always looking for innovative solutions that are looking at the root causes. You started out with the systemic piece doesn't get amplified as much, and we always make it about the person and their decision. And so I think we know we need to address the root causes, or else it becomes kind of like you said, a revolving door cycle. I pass it on to T. What else you got for?
So just a follow up on reintegration. What role would you say education plays in that process?
Well, I think education plays a large piece. If you look at the statistics, I think it's the majority, about 80% of people have a grade 4 level education in prison. So the numbers are not very good. Yeah. And when you go into prison, I don't know what they did since they took away the GED. But,
they're actually still figuring it out. Nothing has been formally announced.
Yeah. So when I was
happen exactly when they took that away?
Very recently.
Just this year, I believe, right?
They didn't really make a big announcement about it either. It's been kind of hush hush.
Yeah.
Okay.
And unfortunately, so I mean, the way it is, first of all, let's break it down to, we've got usually, retired teachers or semi-retired teachers that are being contracted by Correctional Service Canada to go in and teach the people incarcerated so that they can get their GED. And so if you even look at that in itself, these aren't people that are trauma-informed. These aren't people that are used to dealing with people that may have, cognitive behavior issues or traumatic brain injury for one, and all these additional complexities that they wouldn't normally deal with. So that in itself, could be better if we hired people that would have that type of training and would be able to provide it. But outside of that, there's no access to post-secondary education. It used to be that you could do it if you pay for it yourself, but you would have to do it fully offline. So it'd be purely paper-based. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. Everything's done online. So they don't allow the internet into the federal prisons.
Yeah, no, they don't.
And that's something I'm working on now, working with public safety to try and change those policies. There's programs in place that mitigate risk so that we can have internet for educational purposes, and that, block sites. I mean, they already do it for their staff. Staff
Right.
can't
So
go
why
onto
not?
certain sites. So it's not like it isn't happening. They just haven't changed the policies to allow for it. So I do invest in some organizations that provide education to people who are currently incarcerated. And so Dr. L. Jones at Mount St. Vincent University was one of them, who was an investment done with the Coverdale one as a part of the learning ecosystem.
Okay.
And so she actually took her programming. She's an associate professor at MSVU. And she took her programming and made it into a purely offline. And it's a very tedious process. I mean, she's on 3-way calls, giving lectures over the phone,
Yeah.
taking down assignments for people, mailing things back and forth. And this is offering full degree programs. So actually it's really good, because now I've been in conversations with MSVU, and I said, you were the first university to have tuition waivers for youth who were wards of the Crown. We need this for formerly incarcerated. So we're actually in the process of designing that admissions right now to have tuition waivers for formerly incarcerated. And
nice.
this would also provide that, continuum of care. When they're coming out, they start their education inside, they can continue without disruption.
Right.
And not have to worry, because we have things in place for full wraparound services, housing support, mental health support, addiction support, anything that somebody would need, including emergency assistance, things like that. So those are just a couple. Then education is very important. I also do Vancouver Island University's Inside Out program.
Okay.
And
Nice.
they're in some different institutions in British Columbia, and it matches an inside student, so somebody who's incarcerated, with a student who's in university, and they take a course together.
Yeah.
And then they have these think tank alumni where they, discuss different issues that they've recognized and acknowledge, and try to find solutions to those. Whether it's making systemic changes or
I mean, I think the return on investment for education, it's always a good one when we're able to track it. I know just a couple of things on the education point you mentioned. A couple of years ago, I did a bit of a scan around education that was available to folks while incarcerated in Ontario, and really in our province, the two main folks who are doing programming inside around that were Walls to Bridges, which kind of has that, doing a class, bringing folks from the outside with folks who are on the inside, and Amadeus, who well, who do either GED, finishing their Ontario Secondary School diploma, or through paper-based correspondence, doing a post-secondary course. Now, we are working with Kevin McKennis from CSC, where they've kind of created these courses that on devices which have been vetted. So they don't have internet, but the links have been vetted in order for folks to be able to complete courses. It's offered within federal facilities, and we are hoping to advocate and work to bring it within provincial facilities, because one of the problems, to your point, is the federal and the provincial, they don't talk. And there is a major inconsistencies across that. And I think that would bring, would create opportunities for folks to be able. So there is some good things happening, but we don't know what's going to happen with the GED replacement. But we know education is really, really important. And the one thing I did also find when I was doing that literature scan and what exists is college and universities have accommodations, right? But being incarcerated is actually not one of the approved criterias for accommodations, when in fact it should be. And so I think that's something we need to continue to advocate for in order to make that happen. And, places like the United States do have something like the Pell Grants, where folks who are incarcerated can apply for scholarships. And we don't have something like that in Canada.
Actually, those have slowly been taken away too.
Yeah.
One of my friends, Nancy Lewis, is one of the professors down in New York State for those programs.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they've been taken away as well. So,
What was the name of that show on Netflix? Do you remember? That's all about education in prison. It's not coming to me, but I think it's called Prison Education. It's a really good series. If folks haven't watched it, I highly recommend to check it out.
I'm going to go look for it. Thank you.
Yeah, so for us, we got a couple more questions before we wrap it up. I know you've had a wealth of experiences. You've done such a beautiful job taking your lived experiences and helping people who don't understand how the system works to then think about policy and processes. So can you tell us a little bit around some of the advisory roles, the board memberships, testifying before Senate committees, and how that type of advocacy has led to some current legislative or policy changes?
Right. So, I mean, it's great that I'm able to fund and provide non-financial supports to organizations, but unless we're actually truly making systemic change, we're never going to get any further ahead than we already are. Because even when we do find better solutions, improve these better solutions with the same policies in place, it's always going to, regress back to what's already existing and not working. And I just want to point out also, like, in no way do I point the finger and lay blame. This isn't a blame game about corrections does it wrong or government does it wrong and things like that. This is about working together to find those better solutions and build those better solutions. So, we don't limit our funding to just organizations, and this isn't just like a pitchfork against the government type thing. If corrections came up with something phenomenal that they wanted to do, I would definitely support that if it was finding better solutions to what people really need.
Oh, the question? No problem. It was really about how have some of your experiences, with committees have influenced change?
Right. So, I mean, I get heavily involved in a lot of things on the back end. And the reason I do that is because, like I said, what I'm doing now really proves out better solutions and gives enough information and data that we can then take and try and make those policy changes and legislative changes. For instance, like I just spent healthcare inside the prisons is just, again, these are people that are hired by Correctional Service Canada. So, confidentiality is non-existent. They don't treat people the same incarcerated as they would outside the prisons. Think about being a pregnant mother inside a prison and going to give birth handcuffed to a bed while giving birth, things like that. Or having to go, like myself, having surgeries down below for the damage that was caused from all my abuse, and having guards standing there, invading your privacy. There is no privacy, even though you have a right to that privacy, so those are other things. And so I just spent over a year on the Technical Standards Committee as a policymaker, designing those standards for Correctional Service Canada when it comes to healthcare of incarcerated individuals. And it actually was launched yesterday in a public draft for review. Okay. So that was released yesterday. You can find it on my LinkedIn page. If you want to provide any insight, comments, or feedback that we will then take back. It's open for public review till September 22nd of this year. And then we'll take that back and take those into consideration while doing the final draft.
Awesome. No, thank you for that.
Okay, Sarah. So we really value you as a funder. And we really love the work that you're doing. So I just want you to talk a little bit about how you came across the work that we do here at YAAACE and how the partnership is going for you.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to hear from Artavan, and him and Devon were able to tell me about the wonderful work that they were doing here and the ideas that they had for the dynamic custody model that they were looking at. And of course, I was extremely interested in what they were doing. And, I can't even keep up with everything they do because it's always just, I love visiting here and just seeing the impact that it's having, because I get to come here and see the youth in action, and
it's a busy place.
and everything that's going on, and it's constantly like, oh, we've added this and we've done this, and and finding somebody like Artavan and Devon and the rest of you that are here with YAAACE, I'm more about investing in people. Any organization can tell you anything, but I can sit down with the individuals and I can see the passion and the devotion and, recognizing that, the needs of the individuals that they're serving are what's important, and really, trying to hone in on what those are. And I see that here, and just, the fact that these are youth that are in conflict with the law, and often, with firearms related charges and things like that. And, people don't understand how people get to that place. And I think that's important, is understanding the stories of how this happens. And quite often it's because, Canada spends $84 billion a year to keep people in poverty.
That's a very high number.
So when you're born into, Toronto community housing, and, in Nova Scotia, we saw it when they took people who lived in Africville and moved them up to Uniacke Square and, put them all into this place, and then built up this environment of poverty, that people were stuck in this cycle. And generation after generation, people are being born into the same cycle of poverty, and, no resources and nothing for no way out, and no, the oppression and colonization and everything that goes on. To recognize the root causes. These youth aren't coming out and getting guns because they want to be cool and they want to commit crimes. They're getting guns because they are in a place where they're not safe, and they see generation after generation that this has been an unsafe place to be, and they want to protect themselves. They're scared.
Yeah.
They're scared. They don't have these criminal masterminds where they want to go out and, take over the world. They're fearful, and they don't want to die. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And, recognizing that. And I think the big thing is recognizing, the system as a whole was based on a foundation of oppression and racism and discrimination and colonization. The criminal justice system in Canada was designed to oppress and control the Indigenous population. That's why it was created. So when you take that foundation of bigotry and racism and whatnot, and you build on that, and then those people are teaching the next people coming in the same laws and the same system, it's a cycle, just like the cycle of poverty and the cycle of criminalization and intergenerational trauma and things like that. It's just on a different, two different levels. And, just like what people do in community to help criminalized individuals, a lot of it's putting Band-Aids on things. It's no different than the criminal justice system. They've got this rotten foundation that they build this house on. And when they see parts of the house crumbling, they tear down and fix those parts of the house, but it's still on a rotten foundation. And so it's never going to be sustainable. It's never going to change. It's never going to be a nice house until you tear it down completely and start from the ground up. Well, it's the same with, these youth and people who have been incarcerated or in conflict with the law. Until we address the poverty and the systemic oppression and marginalization and discrimination that's keeping them in this cycle of violence. And, until we actually tear it down and build it from the ground up, we're not going to see real change.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the fact that you said, you invest in people, I think that's very important. And we're really grateful here at YAAACE being able to have such amazing people like Tanisha who have that lived experiences, because I think nobody wants to talk to someone about their problems or their trauma if you don't trust or think that they're not going to understand you, which is why, as an example, we have so many parents come and say, you know what, my child that acts up in school or in community, but when they're here at YAAACE, it's, they're so different, right? It's because they feel validated, they feel seen, they feel listened. And it sounds a little bit cliche, but if we can do that consistently, particularly during those difficult times, it makes a big difference. And, I want to just flip it to you, Tanisha. Like, how is it for you being in that role of now doing programming and supporting people who have gone through, struggles that, you could relate to?
How is it for me working with them? Like, sometimes it's like, I like to help them replay their tape. I call it like playing the tape till the end, just making sure they're recognizing where they made their mistakes. Because even for myself, there was a lot of self-reflection during my reintegration. So I just feel like it's really important to make sure that they take things step by step, that they're able to take things slow, let them know that they're capable, because a lot of times they feel like they're not and they're stuck and they can't do this and they can't do that. A lot of motivation, because sometimes they get so used to the waking up at this time, breakfast at this time. They're so stuck in this like structured time. It's kind of like trying to break that and give them flexibility to break them out of that kind of like laziness. So implementing certain things in programming where it comes to like self-esteem boosting and learning the healthy boundaries and learning when to say no, being okay with saying no, and don't let anyone feel like, they can judge you for making a different decision. I enjoy it because I feel like they adapt to it quickly, and then they're listening to somebody that has been there. So it's not like I'm steering you into a wrong place. So they're more receptive to it. And it's the delivery too. Like, I like to practice my delivery a lot because I don't want them to feel like this is what I did, don't do it. But more meeting them where they're at, talking to them on their level. So the majority of them are like children with programming. So not making feel like I'm towering over them with all the rules and what they need to be doing. But you know what? I've been there before. Listen, this is how it goes. And then showing them what they can be. Very rewarding.
I mean, that's beautiful, because almost like, regardless of what you went through, it makes you who you are, and we started out with sharing your story and very deep, and, it makes you who you are, and it gives you that currency to be able to navigate the different spaces, because you understand how power works and how oppression works, and you become an advocate for it. So,
well, I just want to add also, I think like for you and I, that lived experience is important. Like, I know when I came out, I still had over 3 years of parole to do. My sentence didn't actually end until February 4th of 2023.
Okay.
So when I came out, I had to build my credit up again. I had tons of things in the credit bureau.
Yep.
I had to pay that off. I had to work hard and, all these things. But I think, the important thing is I really wanted to show that anybody can do anything if they really work hard towards it and have the right supports in their corner. So I actually bought a house, and the closing date on my house was the day before my sentence ended. February 3rd, 2023 was the closing date on my house, and the next day my sentence ended, just to prove. And now I see people incarcerated that I speak with, and I tell my story and I talk to them, and I get so much feedback about how they're like, wow, like you showed me that I can actually do something. You made me believe that I can actually accomplish things and change my life and actually have goals. And I think that's important for someone like you and I with that lived experience.
Yeah.
Oh,
sure.
Beautiful, powerful. Okay, I'm going to end off with a question, if you can both tackle it. And the question is, what advice would you give to someone who is really in a rock bottom position right now in life and has come across our podcast here and listening to your powerful narratives, whether it's a person directly or it's a parent or a guardian or a caregiver who doesn't know how to cope with their loved one being incarcerated, because there's that family impact side of it. What advice would you give the person or, their circle of care in how to move forward?
Wow. There's so many layers to that question, Yvette. So some advice I would give for maybe parents or loved ones that have people incarcerated: try to learn the process, research as much as you can. And even though you can't physically be present, at least be very active, because sometimes like those phone calls is all you have, especially if you're on lockdown for 23 hours or for whatever reason, bell went down and the phones are not working. Like, just be present, be available when you can. For those that feel like they're at rock bottom, write things down. There's nothing wrong with starting over. Don't feel like you can never start over. Write it down. And think things through step by step. Break things apart slowly. Don't try to put all your eggs in one basket at a time. Just slowly think it through. And there's nothing wrong putting it on paper so you can visually see it and create a vision board of where you want to be so you know what you're working towards.
Awesome. Thanks for that. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I echo that. And, I'll add also, if you're a parent or a loved one of somebody who's incarcerated, as you said, that, that contact's so meaningful. But also, there's enough shame, there's enough guilt. We don't need more of that.
Yeah.
Try and be more supportive and understanding. And if that means, talking more to, people in your community, organizations that work with people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, just to gain more knowledge and understanding and empathy. It doesn't mean you're condoning the behavior. It means that you're trying to work together so that you can best support your loved one when they're coming out and while they're inside, so that, and believe in them. That's one thing, is if you don't have someone who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself, you're not going to be able to be successful. And for those who have reached rock bottom, there's so many places out there that, like YAAACE and Amadeus and Urban Res Solutions. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. There's so many supports in the community. There's people with lived experience. Reach out to somebody, anybody. You can get connected. You don't have to talk to the first person you reach out to, but you could be connected to somebody else that you could talk to. You're not alone, and you don't have to do this alone. There's people who understand, people who care, and you are worth that. You are worth it. You deserve it. And, don't be afraid to, even if you don't think you're worth it, you are. People believe that you are, and they're there to support you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn through the powerful stories. I want to thank both of you for being vulnerable, really sharing all the things you've gone through, a lot of traumatic stuff, but how you've been able to harness that and use that and, with your passion and compassion to really lead and do some amazing work and try to change the root causes of what leads to incarceration, but also how more effectively we can, do reintegration in ways that are sustainable and allows folks to then also give back and pay it forward. So I'll say, any of you want to, any concluding thoughts or comments before we wrap up another episode?
I could go on forever, so I'll just say thank you so much for having me here today. It's always a great honor and privilege to be able to come and see the amazing work that you're all doing here with the youth in your community, and how it's transforming lives, and just keep up the great work. And I love working with you alongside with
We're
this,
grateful.
Along this journey, and let's just keep doing it for 1,000,000 years.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. And that's a wrap on another episode. And Hope to, let us know what you think and follow us on our social media platforms. And until next time, cut. All right.